I'd now like to introduce our speaker. Carolann Grieve is a family wealth advisor responsible for assisting families with a wide variety of wealth management needs, including estate planning, tax, financial planning, fiduciary philanthropy, and family governance issues. She is a long-standing member of the firm's Family Education and Governance Working Group and is a designated specialist in each of these areas. In addition, Carolann chairs GenSpring's Women and Wealth Initiative. Through this initiative, she works with her GenSpring colleagues to create a welcoming environment and emphasizing a holistic approach to financial stability, which in turn enables women to live an informed and responsible life with wealth, to feel fulfilled and empowered to achieve their goals. It's a pleasure to introduce her, and she will then introduce the panel. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. I'm honored to be here today to facilitate this conversation with three remarkable women, Mem Bernstein, Ariane de Vienne, and Winnie Grinspoon. They're here today to talk to you and share their experiences and best practices for collaborating with others to leverage impact, how they measured their impact and success, and discuss the innovative ways that they are creating change. So before we begin, I'm going to ask each of them to tell you a little bit about themselves. We're not going to go deeply into that because you all have their bios at your seat. So, ma'am, would you mind starting?
Good morning. Can you hear me? I'm very happy to be here. I think it's fair to say, and I think my co-panelists would agree, that most philanthropists are engaged in the things that animate their lives. So since you have my bio, I'll just add that I am a mother of three. Each one of my children is married, and they themselves have 9 3/4 children. And of the 8 school-age children, they're all in Jewish day schools, as were my children. And I think that it's no surprise, therefore, that I am animated by having raised a Jewish family, and our foundation's efforts are involved with Jewish education, literacy, and culture.
Great. Ariane.
Okay, is that on? Yes, on as well. I'm Ariane de Vienne, and I sort of come a little bit more from the other side. I have the tremendous respect for philanthropy, but I've always looked and saying, how can we have a holistic solution? How do we look also at investment capital to support these enormously important things that philanthropy tries to change? And so my take will come a little bit more from that side. And for me, it's just the passion that we manage by the right kind of means that we have the most effective amount of change.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So I came to philanthropy as a family member, really. About 25 years ago, my father-in-law, Harold Grinspoon, called me and said, I'm starting a foundation and I'd like you to serve as a trustee. And I know you're too busy, you have young children, you're working full-time, but I'm gonna put you on the board, send you materials, and I just love to have your feedback on some of my ideas. And so that's really how I started. And I have been on the board ever since. And then as my father-in-law became more and more involved in his philanthropy, I became more involved with him. And 2 years ago, about a dozen years ago, he asked if I would give his foundation a day a week of my time, and I did. And then, so we've really grown in this together. And 2 years ago, I took on the presidency and have just wound down my law practice.
Great. Thank you. So let's get right to it. Winnie, let's talk a little bit about the foundation that your father-in-law started and the mission and how it may have developed and changed over time. Would you mind telling us about that?
Sure. And I should mention my mother-in-law as well, Diane
Okay.
Trodeman, who's also very involved as a partner with Harold. But Harold is really the driving force and the creative force. And so he made money in real estate, and he actually had cancer of the tongue, and it was a moment for him where he had to decide, what were the next, hopefully, many years of his life would be like, and he decided he didn't want to be a guy who who died having just made money. And so at that point, he set up a foundation, and Diane was very instrumental in helping him focus on what he cared about. And he decided that he would make the Jewish community his focus. And so the foundation started. It was going to be a local Western Massachusetts focus, and it started the mission originally was enhancing Jewish life in Western Massachusetts. Literally, that was it. But he really came to enjoy philanthropy and seeing what his money could do for the community, and so we started programs that were more national in focus. And so then we changed the mission statement to be enhancing Jewish life in Western Massachusetts and beyond. And we're actually at a point now where we're international, and we do a lot of work in Israel and other countries. And so we are revamping our mission statement because we do a program, for example, for Arab-speaking kids in the Arab community in Israel. And we realize that our mission statement doesn't match what we're doing on the ground. And so as we have evolved, our mission has evolved.
Okay, great. Ma'am, how about you? Your late husband started a foundation. Would you talk a little bit about your the mission statement and how that's developed over time?
Sure. A little bit unlike Winnie. So my late husband, Sanford Bernstein, started the foundation in 1984, and the mission statement was established at that point and hasn't changed at all, not a bit. It calls for the trustees to encourage those of the Jewish faith toward a greater commitment to Jewish observance and lifestyle, while encouraging their gathering of more information about our Jewish customs, traditions, and laws, and to encourage mutual understanding between Jews of different religious backgrounds. The foundation operates in Israel, the United States, and the former Soviet Union, and through all of our programming, that is exactly what we attempt to do.
Great, thank you. Ariane, how have you worked with families and foundations to actually leverage their impact?
So maybe a little step back. I started focusing a lot on the philanthropy because in dealing with wealthy families, so often if it was just investment capital, it was more of a burden and not something that they actually could be proud of. And so with that turning a lot more to the philanthropy, I tried to understand, what is really your mission statement? What are you trying to achieve? And what I definitely not want to have? And, look at the grant program, but then also look at the corpus, at the endowment, and just look to see whether the endowment is really invested in line with what some of the mission is. And give you where it's an easy example is when a mission goes around climate change, for example. You may do enormously good things with your grant money, but at the same time, your endowment may actually undo all the good you're doing with your endowments. And so it's been my quest to really help foundations to understand what's happening in the main body of their investment portfolio, and to what degree can it be better aligned with the kind of focus they're having in their grant giving. And maybe a little side word to that, I know you have the bios there. I just recently changed and went to a firm that provides that kind of analysis, because I find what's needed is people need to be able to see it and then need to be able to work with it, so you can really double up on the good you're doing already on your granting side.
Great. So, Mem and Winnie, both of you, the founders of the foundations that you've worked at, had a different view of the philanthropy. Tell us a little bit about the business focus that maybe they started. Maybe, Winnie, you can start with that.
Sure. So Harold is a business guy, and he realized early on that he enjoyed actually creating something through philanthropy. Rather than just writing checks to other organizations, he wanted to build something himself. And so one of the projects that we run is a project called PJ Library, PJ standing for pajamas. And the thought being that if you send a book a month into the home of a family, you can change bedtime moments and perhaps engage a family into the Jewish community in a way that hadn't been done before. And it's an idea that we copied, quite frankly. Dolly Parton, of all people, was our inspiration. Dolly Parton has a foundation called the Imagination Library, where she mails a book a month to the home of underprivileged kids. And she started this many years ago, and then she scaled it by reaching out to partners in other communities. And so Harold heard a piece on NPR about her and her model, and decided to fund Imagination Library for kids in his community. And the model was very simple. You know, somebody else did all the work. He wrote a check. Children were receiving books. You know, it was all good. He was getting thank you notes, and it just was an easy and comfortable model. And he was part of something big. And he was at a Seder at my home and saw me give books to my kids, and he said, "There are Jewish children's books? What are those? And that's interesting. And can I see some? I have samples if anybody wants to see." So, and so anyway, long story short, he said, "I have an idea. Let's do a Jewish Imagination Library, and let's send a book a month into somebody's home." And so so that really changed the course of what we were doing as a foundation. Rather than writing lots of large national grants, we started investing in this project. And this project actually is a collaboration. We are a supporting foundation and a public charity. So we can accept gifts, and we can partner, and we do partner everywhere we go. And so for us to expand our program, we partner with 501c3 organizations in every community in which we operate. And so where I live, for example, in Boston, the JCCs of Greater Boston operates this program, PJ Library, on the ground. We partner with them, we share the cost of the program, and so then we can engage people on the ground. And so so it's very business focused in that we are measuring our brand, how is the product received. It's all about return on investment. And we also are in the Jewish overnight camp space and in the legacy space, and we do challenge grants. Everything's measurable, and it's not left to chance, I would say.
Okay. Ma'am, how about you? Could you talk a little bit about some of the metrics, or I should say, go back to the question that I asked originally, sorry, about the business focus that your late husband had when he started his work?
Well, as many of you know, my late husband was Sanford Bernstein, and the business was research and money management. So when he formed the Avichai Foundation, his focus was on excellence in grant making, policy, and administration. And it followed that thread throughout the entirety of the foundation's work to this very day. The foundation, when it approaches any kind of an issue that it wants to tackle, goes into research mode first. So there's a research component, and then of course finding a grantee who can carry out what it is we choose to do, and then of course all of the evaluation and follow-ups after. The interesting thing about the foundation is that once the money went into the foundation, every trustee was responsible for it. Mr. Bernstein didn't have any more than any other trustee's vote. It was one man, one vote. And it was designed as a trustee-driven foundation rather than a staff-driven foundation. So the trustees came up with the ideas of the programming that they wanted to see initiated. That only changed later on, many years later, many years later, when we decided to sunset the foundation, and we'll talk about that later,
Yes.
I think. But at that time, we employed Joel Fleischman to chronicle our spend down. And during that first year of chronicling, he also criticized. He hadn't been asked to do that, but he had no problem. And one of his criticisms was that the trustees could no longer look at each project as they had before, but rather in a spend down mode had to look at the forest rather than the trees. And so then staff started to kick in a much greater capacity. But up until that point, it was a trustee-driven foundation whose policies and administration was very strongly defined by my late husband.
Great. So Ariane, what sort of out-of-the-box innovative strategies have you used with families to have an impact?
I'm thinking back on a case while I was in Hong Kong, and Asians think I have a great reverence really for philanthropy. And I was working with a family for whom advocacy and education was very important. And they've, amongst other things, really strongly supported a university for women. And so looking at all the work they were doing around women's support and education, then said, you know, what happens to these women in nations that still don't really look at women as equals, what happens to them after university? How can we make sure they get jobs? How can we make sure that actually this will benefit their community? And so we looked at a loan program, preferential loan program for the companies that would start employing these women. We also looked at a VC pool that as these women were starting businesses under certain criteria, that you'd invest some, venture capital money in there. And again, coming back to measuring, very, very important in the front to sort of think about how do you want to measure what's success? So you see where you want to do more of or where you want to scale back. Because it is a journey. You start out, you need to measure, and then you tend to adjust as you see, what works better, what is more in line with what you're trying to achieve.
Great. How about you, Winnie? Would you talk a little bit about the challenge grants that you've actually used in practice to help you leverage your impact?
Sure. As I mentioned, we do work in the Jewish overnight camp space, and there was another example really where Harold's kind of business head took over. He got on a plane and flew around the country and looked at overnight camps, and he saw that the not-for-profit Jewish overnight camps were looking kind of dowdy, they were looking kind of run down, et cetera, and he also visited for-profit camps and said, we are not going to fill these camps unless we compete. And there are a lot of Jewish kids going to the fancier camps. They don't have to be fancy, but they have to be, they have to have a certain level of facilities. And so he said, okay, rather than my continuing to give a grant to camps who have their heart in the right place but don't know how, might not know the best practices to run a business, he started a program which we now call JCamp 180, which is basically providing management consulting services to camp. And so we work one-on-one with a camp, and we train them in board development, strategic planning, and fundraising capacity. And so after we've worked with a camp for, let's say, a year, we say, okay, here's a challenge grant. So let's see if you can mobilize a fundraising effort among your big supporters. And so we will roll out a challenge, which might be for every $2 you raise, we'll give you $1 up to a certain amount, and for gifts over a certain amount, we'll match it higher. And this round will be for capital improvements, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've been able to leverage that beautifully, actually, and we, I believe it's $11 million in challenge grants has leveraged $88 million in dollars raised by the camps on their own that simply are using a dedicated effort and a challenge opportunity to raise money from supporters. And what they hear from their supporters are, camp was the thing that we loved most. No one's ever asked me before for my camp. And so people are very happy to give to their summer camp.
Mm-hmm. And ma'am, I believe you talked to me a little bit about changing the focus, something about 3 years in, and how now you're, instead of funding some organization, you're telling them you'll fund them for a shorter period of time so that they could then go on and find some leverage elsewhere.
We did not have that conversation.
Oh, we did not?
No.
Okay.
No.
My notes are wrong then.
No, I think what I said was that our foundation does not go in for 3 years and out.
Oh, okay.
But otherwise it was perfect.
All right.
No, we don't. As a matter of fact, a little bit different. Most foundations do. They do go in on their way out. But I will,
Yes,
really to your credit,
yes.
I will say this. It's true that when the foundation was up and operating for all of these many years, we went into projects that in many cases we birthed. And so as we were the parents of them, there was really no getting out. But in fact, when we started thinking about a spend down, we did go to all of our grantees and we notified them and we asked them how it would be best for them that we exited, in the hopes that they could continue on after we closed our doors. And so in many cases, and certainly now, we are granting 2, 3, and 4 years in advance, because then it's over for us and we really didn't want to go over the cliff. And so we have been doing that, but until then, no, we didn't.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay. Sorry,
But-
I misunderstood.
That's okay, that's okay. Can I follow up a little
Yes,
bit on something
please.
when you said, there was a time in the foundation when we also recognized the needs for Jewish day schools and Jewish summer camps to increase and enhance their facilities. And so Avichai set up 2 funds. One was a $50 million fund and the other a $25 million fund. And both were interest-free loans for Jewish day schools and Jewish summer camping. And they were construction loans, as I said, interest-free. They were anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, and they had to come with bank guarantees. These funds carried on for years and years, and I think for the Jewish Day School Fund, which we've only just closed last year, but fortunately was picked up by another philanthropist who is carrying it on going forward, the $50 million fund raised, I think, over $170 million in advancements of their equipment and their buildings and all of their facilities. So these funds were very instrumental in helping Jewish day schools and Jewish summer camps to enhance their facilities.
Ariane, when we talked, you mentioned something called sustainable investing. Would you mind talking to the audience about that? I thought it was so profound.
You mean my favorite topic?
Yes.
And we were coming from the philanthropy starting point and sort of looking that grant capital makes a change, but once the grant capital has been given, it's been given, and then it will be turned into some kind of change. And how important it also is to look at the investment capital that generates the ability to do the grant capital and keep that operating in a way of sustainability. And that really means 2 things. It on one side means directing it in a way so that you create more sustainability of your outcomes, of what you're trying to do with your mission. And the other side is that you really have your capital invested in a way that it is not taking away what we have on this earth, so that doesn't create a bad footprint, but that rather you invest in issuers, in companies that are mindful and doesn't mean that you can't invest in the normal large caps. It's just a question of not to invest in companies that really go against some of the human rights issues that where really it may look like it's a nice return, but ultimately there are tremendous risks embedded, and in the meantime a lot of things that we hold dear being violated. So it's a combination, and we were really coming from the philanthropy side, and so there the emphasis was, how can we make sure that the mission that the foundation has can really create a bigger footprint, so that we don't just use the grant capital, but that we also use the investment capital that in turn will provide a return that then can get recycled to with the same kind of mission again, and we're creating a much bigger impact.
So what I'm hearing you saying is you're not only using philanthropic dollars, but you're also using investment dollars to actually have impact.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about metrics. So, Winnie, what kind of metrics do you use, and what do you do with those metrics once you have them, in terms of, do you change your approach? How might you change your approach to doing things? Can you just give us some examples of that?
Sure. So in some areas it's very easy. So in the matching grant scenario, right? We know whether a grantee achieves its goal. They'll set their goal for the top line of a match. They go out and meet as many people as they can. They achieve the goal. They've done what we set out for them to do. What we've jointly agreed to do as grantor and grantee. And so those are easy. Our other programs are a little more complicated. How do we measure the impact of PJ Library? Well, we take it in small chunks. So our partners run engagement activities on the ground. So we have our partners report back to us. What did they do with grant money? How many programs did they run? How many people came to the event? We survey the people who attend. Did you enjoy the event? We survey people who receive our product. We do book surveys all the time. So random email surveys to recipients. Did you like the books? Did you read the books? How many times a week? Et cetera, down to the illustrations. And so we're measuring the recipient of the product, the partner that runs the program for us as the contact with people on the ground. And then we adjust the program based on what we find. So, from the basics, if a book survey shows that people didn't love that book's not in the lineup again. If we find out that a program that requires a family to attend 3 times in 6 months is too much, our next grant cycle doesn't require that or include that as an option. So it's very iterative, and we're continuing to look at our survey results and then adjust. We also we send out 146,000 books a month in North America, to give you some sense of the size. And so we did an online survey of our recipients, like a 15-minute long survey about 3 years ago, and 20,000 people responded. So we had quite a lot of data from that survey, and we're about to launch our next survey to see where those families have gone, and whether by engaging in this program a family has changed in some way. We ask very subtle questions. Do you read the books? Do you attend programs? And have you attended more since you started the program? What conversations are you having in your home? Are you having conversations about Jewish topics that you might not have had before? And so what we're finding is that wherever people started, they've moved. And so that's really how we gauge whether we're doing well.
How about with the partners that you have leveraged impact with, in terms of working with them and measuring the impact that they're having? Do you do anything like that?
We do. All of our partners provide a report to us every year where they talk about all sorts of things, what their 3-year funding out looks like. So we want to make sure that they're looking ahead and continuing to keep the program viable. We don't like surprises. We hate, that moment, oops, we ran out of funding and we now have all these families who are expecting us to come through. We look to see how many programs are running on the ground, how many people are attending, what the feedback has been. We also have a staff of people we call program officers who have a portfolio of communities, and they are the liaison, and they do phone interviews, they check in, and they literally keep track of their phone calls. How is the community doing? Where can we be of help? And what resources can we provide so that they can disseminate? We track social media. We make sure that our communities have the tools they need to be successful, and make sure that if we can be of help and provide more so that everybody wins, it's available.
Ma'am, how about you? What sort of metrics have you used, and how has that impacted your grant making?
Well, in the early days of the foundation, grant making was pretty scattered, and so clear metrics were just not possible. But in the late 1990s, when we began to focus primarily on Jewish day school education and Jewish overnight summer camping, we knew what we wanted to achieve, and we measured our against our goals. It became simpler, and we could, of course, as everyone knows, it changes from program to program, but we could look at things like the number of principals in our principals training programs, or the number of students taking our Hebrew language learning programs. We could look at the number of returning counselors that were in our Jewish enhancement programs, or the amount of money that was raised in some of our match programs. So the metrics became much easier, but of course, there are many things that we do are just not quantifiable.
And maybe if I jump in
Yes,
here
please.
too, and now really with my hat as board president for High Water Women, where we provide the largest after-school financial literacy training for low-income kids. We face, because measurement is very important for us to know, is our curriculum right, whom do we need to reach? And we face the challenge that a lot of these children just don't have access to computers. And so we actually need to go and take samples and do like door-to-door surveys to see where the impact is and to follow these kids to see are they making wiser choices. So I think that measuring is so important, and sometimes it's a little easier and sometimes it's just much more challenging.
I might add
Yes,
that
please.
with all of the grants that we make, there are benchmarks. And so the grantees have to meet those benchmarks. If they don't, then the trustees once again have to look and determine whether or not this grant is actually accomplishing what we set out to do. And if it doesn't, we either terminate or we give notice for change, and change occurs, or it doesn't, and then we terminate.
How do you develop those benchmarks?
So we develop them with the grantees. You know, once we decide on a program and we find a provider who can produce what we like, we work with them very closely, in the beginning surely very closely, and we define what it is that we're looking to accomplish and what they think they can do for us. If it turns out that they can't, or if we overestimated what could be done, so then we change. But generally speaking, it's a very close collaborative between Avichai trustees and the grant makers and the grantees.
Does anyone have anything else to add?
You know, as Mem speaking, I'm thinking to many of the discussions we have, and you know, it becomes a real tightrope walk. You know, how involved are you in the business of your grantee, and when are you just inserting yourself in a way that's not productive? You know, we want a real partnership with our grantees, and we don't want them to see us as upsetting the work that they know how to do really better than we do. But on the other hand, we do want to make sure that the money that we're investing is well spent. So in each case, it's a different dance, but it's something we're very cognizant of. And if a grant doesn't go well, sometimes it's because what we set up just wasn't set up in the right way, and we asked too much, or the grantee felt they really didn't think they could achieve it, but didn't want to disappoint us, and needed the funding, and so we try to be very reflective.
Might I add that Winnie's right. About 10 years ago, the foundation hired a company to go to our grantees and ask them about us. And it was very interesting. I mean, in many ways, we were very pleased with ourselves and continued on as we had before. But in some ways, they were instrumental in causing us to change what it was we were doing, because I think Winnie's right. There are times when you just get yourself too involved. And as I said, it was a trustee-driven foundation. So each trustee was looking at their baby as if they had created it himself or herself. And so you do get a little bit too close to these projects. And then oftentimes, when you think you should make adjustments, the trustee themselves don't really want to. And so it is a balancing act. It is a little bit of a dance. But you try to do the best that you can.
Winnie, tell us a little bit more about your collaboration with other organizations to leverage impact. You said that you work with a lot of existing organizations. How do you find those organizations, and you know, how do you decide to partner with them?
Sure. So in the PJ library world, as I said from the beginning, we knew we couldn't scale this without taking advantage of the organized Jewish community that exists. And so we really went door to door to the organization and the community that we thought might be interested. PJ Library might meet their mission. And so the Federation is our partner in most of the communities in which we operate. In some places there's no federation, or the Federation, for whatever reason, wasn't the right partner at that time. So as I said, there are some JCCs who are our partners. There are day schools that are our partners in small communities. There are synagogues that are our partners in small communities. New York has been an interesting model for us because when we came to New York, there was no one organization that could take on PGA Library and the potential size of it. And so we weren't in New York for the first couple of years, and it felt like such a missed opportunity. So we said, okay, change of plan. If we can't find one partner organization, let's open it up to many, many partner organizations. And so we did, and so we have been operating in New York with about 80 partners on the ground.
Yes.
Which has its benefits and its limitations. And so we are actually restructuring New York and how we work, because what we found was for a lot of smaller organizations, the fundraising piece and the administrative piece, it wasn't their sweet spot, and really they wanted to be doing the programming, and that's where their expertise was. And so some of the programs just stayed small, and there wasn't a cross collaboration as we had hoped, because there wasn't one entity that was responsible. And so in New York, the Grinspoon Foundation has agreed to take on the administrative and the fundraising responsibility for PGA Library in New York, and to the delight of our partners, by the way, really in conversation with them, and to make our partners programmers, and so take advantage of their strengths and their interests, take on what was burdensome and not working well, and so recreate the model.
Yes.
Based on the realities on the ground.
Right, right. Ma'am, have you had to recreate your model at all? Or, I mean, I think you said that originally the trustees were very much engaged with each individual project, and that over time you had to have them take that step back. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, let's see. I don't know how, do you want me to go into a little bit of the sunsetting? Because
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so my late husband, when he established the foundation, did not discuss with any degree of refinement whether or not he wanted the foundation to go forward. But he did discuss that he thought that philanthropy was liberal, with a capital L, and he was very much against mission drift. And so the trustees, 5 years after his death, decided that we would spend down. Now that required us to look at all of the work we were doing and how we were doing it. And as I mentioned, we hired Joel Fleischman to chronicle the spend down. The reason that we did that was that when we ourselves looked to the field to see what was available in the way of spend down foundations so that we could emulate them, we found little to nothing. I think there were two foundations we could look at. I think the Burden Foundation, I can't even remember what the other was, but it was a foundation that was set up to go out of business in 10 years, and ours just wasn't so set up that way. And Joel's criticism, as I said, was that because it was a trustee-driven foundation, and every trustee looked for a project that they wanted to create or involve himself in, we could no longer do that. We had to look at how this foundation was going to wind itself down. I mean, it's quite a substantial foundation, and we gave ourselves, I think this was, let me see, 99, 2004. In 2005, we decided to spend down. And Avichai will go out of business in the year 2019. And at that time, it will no longer make any grants, except for one. And it was the only grant and the only designated grant that my late husband made. He wanted us to build a conference, a Jewish and Israeli conference center in Israel, which we did do. It's on King George Street, 44 King George, come on over. And the programming is designed around the kind of program that Avichai has been doing all of these years. And so that grant will continue to be made long after we sunset. But other than that, we will stop our grant making in 2019.
Ariane, tell us a little bit about blurring the lines between philanthropy and social responsible, profitable businesses. How have you worked with families around doing that?
It always starts with philanthropy, to really understand what's the mission, what has been done. Do I need to press something? Have that. Oh, yes, sorry. More you, me. Thank you. So it always starts with the mission, and really understanding what is one trying to do, what is one definitely not trying to have to occur, and what has been happening on the grant side. It is also a question of, how much time is the family, if they're involved, willing to spend on this? Because it takes time, and it takes more time in the beginning, and it is a journey. But so with the understanding around the mission and what has been done so far, then to really look and saying, okay, where are the next possibilities on the things that you're supporting with your grants? Are there business opportunities that are coming out of that could actually support the kind of work that you're so far supporting with grants? And a lot depends on what the mission is. Or is it something where through your portfolio and your portfolio selection, you can actually drive capital more towards those kind of companies that support the behavior that you're also trying to see with your grant capital? So a lot depends on the mission. If a mission is education, there's a lot more that you can do in more direct investments, and you'll see less of your impact in the more liquid part of your portfolio, though you can still support it. If it is more of a global problem, and I'm mentioning again climate change, there's a lot more you can do with the public part of your portfolio, and at the same time also through direct investments. And it's always very important, again, in the discussion saying, what are you trying to see as an outcome? And how can we use the different parts of the capital structure, be that through an equity investment, through a preferential loan, through a straight out loan, to have more of that happening. And so that the two really play together, the grant capital and the investment capital.
Can you give us any examples of where you've actually done this with families?
Yeah, again, I think I have done a lot of work around the climate change question or water scarcity. So where a foundation did a lot of granting towards institutions that bring more education around climate change, or support other non-money making but non-for-profit initiatives, and then to analyze really their investment portfolio and look at what is the carbon risk that you're taking in the investment portfolio? Where are your worst offenders? And what would be a better selection within your portfolio on one side, so in the do no harm side, and then in the middle part, more sort of the direct investment, what are some innovative technologies, some innovative approaches that tie in with where in climate change you feel particularly strongly about, that makes sense to invest. And then look at the whole thing again from an overall risk profile and liquidity profile, and seeing that you're still generating enough liquidity to have the money for your granting.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you. So let's just talk a little bit about the alignment between the investments of the assets within the foundation or the organization and actually the your grant making. How do the two of them relate to each other? Mem, can you answer that?
They don't. They don't. It's true that after 2008, when our portfolio took a hit, we had to prioritize our grants. At the time, the trustees decided that they would make fewer grants, and so we had to prioritize our grants and see which ones of the grants we were making were more aligned to our mission, how we're having greater success, were more likely to be sustainable. But in fact, we never looked to align our grant making with our money.
Okay. Winnie, how about you?
Well, my father-in-law's goal is not to sunset, although I've told him many times I could happily do another job. Don't keep this going for my sake. So he wants it to go on into the future. And so for that to be our goal, our investment strategy has to be aligned. And so we are careful not to be too risky. We're looking long-term. And so really that's our driving investment focus. Similar to MEMS, we don't choose our investment. We look for the best return with a safe mix of a portfolio.
Okay, can I add?
Yes, please.
I would add that when we did decide to sunset, we of course went to the Bernstein company and asked them to set out for us a plan, and which they did do. It was excellent, and it still is in place, and it still is working very well, which would determine in what we could invest and what we could expect as a return, and the risk side and the advantage side, and how long our fund could go out, how much we could spend over that period of time. And we followed it, and we haven't had any problem at all.
So it's interesting to hear, Winnie, you say that you don't want to sunset, and Mem, that you do. When you think about that, how does that impact, the next generation and their involvement in these efforts? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's very interesting. My late husband was not interested in family members, either in his business or in his philanthropy. I'm the only family member involved in any of Mr. Bernstein's philanthropies, and that was by his design. In fact, the Avichai bylaws state that no family members can serve on the board, and that's no family members, not only of his family, but none of the trustees' family members can serve on the board. He knew how he wanted his money spent, and he knew who he wanted to spend it. And he kept his eye primarily on the policies, the administration, and the excellence in grant making, as I said before. But he wasn't interested in the foundation going on in perpetuity because he wasn't interested in mission drift. And when he looked out, that's what he saw when he saw philanthropies moving forward without their donors and without their funders and founders involved any longer. So although he didn't set it out for himself, I saw it as my mission to just continue my eye on the ball that he set for us. And I hope in some small way I've been able to do that. I think that it's to the credit of the Avichai staff, which was handpicked largely by Mr. Bernstein before he passed away, and the trustees, who are incredible people, that we've been able to do this.
Right.
So similarly, Harold determined early on that focusing on the Jewish community was going to be where he put his money. And so he set the tone, he set the priorities, he set the mission, and then he said to his family members, basically, this is what we're spending the money on. Anybody who's interested, get involved, rather than I'm going to divide up my money according, X number of ways, and each kid can do what they want. He was very clear. So I'm the only family member other than my mother-in-law who of my generation who's involved. The mission just spoke to me. I was in that world anyway. So that's how our family situation has worked. And on our board, there are 4 hardwired family members, and there are 5 non-family members on the board. And so again, similarly, this is the mission, this is what we're doing. Harold's desire to see it continue is because he feels very strongly that the programs that we're running right now are doing really well, and he would hate to see it just cut off. And the foundation will continue to grow. And so our goal in picking our future board members are in finding people who want to continue the mission that he has set for us. Mm-hmm. I've asked him to write a book. I've asked him to put down in words. He won't, but I did get him to sit in front of a video camera. And what I said to him was, there will be people who did not get the pleasure of working with you and won't know what made you tick. And they will care about wanting to fulfill your mission as a member of your board. So talk to them. Talk to the imaginary board of 2050 and explain to them what you hope they will do with your money. And so that he was willing to do, because he does look around and say, so-and-so is rolling over in their grave watching what they're doing with his money. So he's trying to set up in life what he can, knowing that the future is uncertain, and not handcuffing us, I would say, as to the specifics, but to use an overall mission statement and conversation about what his priorities are to help guide us in the future.
Great. I love the idea of videoing the person who started the foundation. Ariane, how about you? How do families you've worked with, since they're actually using their investment capital, how do they think about the future and this mission drift that we just heard Mem describe?
Yeah, mission drift, yes. It's actually really interesting. So when I have started looking at and analyzing the investment portfolios and sort of pointing out where there are offenders, they are in very unusual corners often. And this kind of, oh, I didn't know this, is just amazing. And it often has reinforced the definition of what are we trying to do, what's really important to us. And sometimes it's just very small things that need to be done in the portfolio. But looking at it reaffirms what one wants to do, and in the after effect has made people much more confident that they're really pulling all the different levers that they have. And in that sense, it's been a very gratifying experience.
Great, great. Well, I see that we're just about out of time in terms of the panel discussion, but I'd really like to open the session up to questions from the audience for our panelists. Yes, please.
Hi, that was terrific. Thank you all. I'm Lauren Katzowitz, Shenfield from Philanthropy Advisors, and this one's for Winnie. I've known Harold and Diane for over 25 years when he was just starting out. In fact, we went on a trip to the former Soviet Union together. You probably know this story. And he was beloved by all members of the trip for having brought an extra suitcase filled with cans of tuna fish, which he generously shared with everyone. But at that time, he was looking to learn, and I followed him for several years, going to every conference and every meeting with nonprofits and trying to figure it out. So you spoke very eloquently about how he then applied his business experience and acumen. I work with many recently retired people and encourage them to take all those skills and experience they have and apply them to your philanthropy. Can you speak a little more about how that insight came to him and how he went about doing it?
You know, it was very natural for him. Literally, he just said, "Oh, I want to do this." He's a creator, and he's got to be busy, and work is fun for him, and so really the second stage of his life post work had to be in a field where he was doing, and not just grant making to others. He served on boards, but that wasn't enough. He really needed to develop something on his own. We've also started a group of co-funders with us, which we're calling the PJ Alliance, which are a small group of people who want to invest in this project at the million and above level, and it's an opportunity for people to come together. We meet twice a year in person and to really dig deep into the business of this project. So you can get involved in it in a way that is not recreating it, but you can be sitting at the table and part of it, really an advisory group. And so we just gathered in Washington together for 3 days, and we met with program professionals and many other experts, marketing experts, etc., so that people can dig in deep with us. And so that is one way that somebody who wants to be involved, but really not to the extent of creating something from scratch, can partner with a project like ours. And I'm sure that other foundations and projects do the same.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Randy Kaufman at EMN Wealth Management, and I'm just curious for the two philanthropists and not Ariane, and I work with wealthy people and have tried to wrap my head around, I think it's wonderful, the grant making, the metrics you're doing, the amount of work that goes into that, but 95% of your assets is in your portfolio. And maybe, and kudos to you, I love Sunsetting Foundation, so maybe you're giving away more than that. But as somebody who's very involved in impact investing, I'm curious to know why you haven't thought about this huge chunk of money which could also be helping your causes. And is it because your wealth advisor has never mentioned it, or is it because you've never thought of it, or is it because you've evaluated it and determined it doesn't meet your fiduciary duty? But because to me, I've never quite understood why people compartmentalize that way.
Well, it isn't really applicable in our case because the foundation is sunsetting. In the time that it was up and operating without a sunset provision, one would have to realize, of course, that we were surrounded by money managers. So it wasn't.
Do impact investing.
Yes, exactly. But here, for example, most philanthropists, when they start their foundations, I think this is true, they'll put in money as they're spending it. So they're not dumping it all in. That only occurs, generally speaking, when someone passes away, which was the case in my husband's case. I mean, he funded as the foundation needed it. It was only after his death that the estate then funded the foundation in its entirety. And at that point, it was only a few years, 5 years, as I said, before we understood that we would sunset. And so your future is determined, and therefore the amount of money that you're spending out over the years is determined. Our grant making has been consistent. We're spending about, I would say, $55 to $60 million a year, and that's been consistent. And it will take us to the end where we then leave just enough to support Beit Avichai. I can't really answer the question. I don't know. We've never been faced with it.
So much of our assets are illiquid as well in real estate, and so we don't have a lot of it sitting in an investment portfolio. What we do have that's liquid and we do invest, is as I said, just a portion, and we keep track of what our future spending is going to be. I mean, these are projects that we have no intention of stepping away from. So if we're spending $20 million a year this year, we're going to spend at least that next year. So we have to make sure that there is that kind of
But
question.
I'm not asking a spend question, I'm asking an investment question.
But would you say that impact investing has become, you'll forgive me, and I don't mean it negatively, the new buzz? It's a new buzz on the street, impact investing. 10 years ago, not so much. 15 years ago, surely not. So in our case, it really wasn't something that we addressed ever. Now, but I do know, and there are very fine philanthropists today who are impact investors. There's no question. But it was, it's like anything else. We were a little too old to learn.
Ariane, maybe you can add.
And in defense, I have to say that a lot of the analysis data, a lot of the tools that make it manageable to get actually first-hand information, where are we, they really haven't been around that long. I mean, that's, but it is, I agree with Randy, there's a lot of dichotomy between the two sides. I'm very much hoping that with the analytical tools we're now bringing to the States, it makes it easy for the foundation to take a look, to take a check, and then decide, is it worse for us to do something or not?
Right. Yes, please.
Can you talk about the giving pledge that Harold signed? How that impacts your foundation?
Harold signed the Giving Pledge 2 years ago now, I believe, and he's now, first of all, so excited about being part of the Giving Pledge. Because he's inspired others to do it and to give more, and nothing makes Harold happier than to bring others along on this philanthropic journey with him. And so he hesitated at first, the public aspect of being a funder in that way, but since he's gotten such positive feedback and has heard from others that as a matter of fact, he was at dinner last night with somebody, and I saw him afterward, and he said, I think they're going to join the Giving Pledge, I convinced them. so he's enjoying bringing others along. I'd say that's really the most important way that's made a change. It hasn't affected our work. He goes to gathering, he's enjoying going to gatherings. He has sent Warren Buffett Sadaka boxes. I'm not kidding. He really has. With kids' artwork on it, so that kind of thing. He's also really quite proud when he goes to a giving pledge event and comes home and says, X percentage of the funder, a large percentage of the funders who've signed the pledge are Jewish, and so he feels a real pride as a Jewish giving pledge funder that so many people in the Jewish community are so philanthropically focused.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
I am curious. I think it's wonderful that you give the books to the Arabic-speaking Israeli schools as well. And I just wonder if you do find sometimes you get people unhappy with that outside the foundation and how you respond in terms of your mission.
So it's fascinating how that came to be, by the way. So we basically took the PJ Library program that's here, and somebody said, you should bring it to Israel. And we said, why? The reason we do PJ Library in the United States is to connect with families who have kind of left, the organized Jewish world, may seem less connected, and really to bring them back in. And in Israel, Israeli kids know what the Jewish holidays are, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyway, we were told that there's a need for the program in the Hebrew-speaking public school system as well. There's the dichotomy between the secular and the religious, and it's neat. And books are very expensive in Israel, so a lot of kids don't have books in their homes, and so it would be important to bring PJ Library to Israel. And so we went to Israel, and we started in the public school system, in the private school system, and the Ministry of Education heard what we were doing and was interested and became our partner. And so we started through the Ministry of Education in the public school system for Hebrew-speaking speakers. Now, the ministry also runs the Arab-speaking schools. And so through our work with the ministry, we engaged in a conversation about, would you consider doing a similar program for the Arab-speaking community? And we said, we are there, happy to do it. And so it was the ministry really that was a strong impetus for us doing the project there. And so we feel really good about it. It's helping all of Israel. There was just a really great article about us in the paper in Israel that the president of Israel wrote about what this project does. In Israel, our Israeli program is much bigger than it is here, actually. We're giving about 240,000 books a month in the Hebrew-speaking community and about 90,000 books a month in the Arabic-speaking community, which is to 100% of the Arabic-speaking kids in that age group. We have gotten no negative feedback. We have challenges like crazy in operating the program. We have, mostly in the Arab world, we have publishers who have refused to work with us because the ministry is part of the program. We have to go to other countries to get the books. And we're very clear that we are not taking Jewish books and translating them to the Arab population. It's a completely separate program, so that there's no concern that we're trying to convert people or do anything nefarious. So it's all been positive.
We have time for one more question. Okay. Well, I want to thank each of our speakers today for being here. And thank you can I please have Lynn Cole come up?
I'm right behind you.
Oh, there you are.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, first of all, for being here. And most importantly, or as importantly, I'd like to thank Winnie, Ariane, Mem, and Carolann for what has been a very, very illuminating program. BlackRock also deserves our thanks for providing the space. I don't know if they provided breakfast, but that helps always, always. For those of you in the Jewish community, you know you don't have an event without food at a Jewish event, and maybe in other communities as well. I'm learning that that's the most effective way to get anybody any place. The morning not only has provided us food to eat, but food for thought. And I'd like to just mention a few ways that I think the Jewish Communal Fund meets some of the most critical points and notes that I took from the discussion this morning. One that Winnie said, there are pivotal points and moments in every philanthropist's life, every business person's life, every advisor's connection with their client. And I think the Jewish Communal Fund can be an important point in turning those pivotal moments into very effective uses of capital and philanthropy. Metrics, successful investments, self-reflection, creative strategies, administrative relief, as well as mission drift preventing it, are all things that I think the Jewish Communal Fund can be helpful to you and your clients. These kinds of programs are just one of the ways that the Jewish Communal Fund is a resource for your advisor community. Through the Jewish Communal Fund Advisor Network, we provide, as today, in-person networking and education, online webinars on practice management, and podcasts with thought leaders in wealth management and philanthropy. I hope that you all receive our I hate saying Jewish Communal Fund, our JCF Advisor Update. And if you're not already a member of the network, please speak with Ellen Israelson, or Ellen or any of the other trustees. Any other trustees and staff here, please put your hands up so that you can be found. Please speak with one of us for further information, and mark your calendars. Sort of, that's an antiquated way of talking to all of you. Press your buttons for September 14th for a breakfast on economic outlook. Again, don't forget to talk to us. If you'd like to take the papers home, you can reach us that way. And thank you again for being part of this breakfast, and particularly thank all of you.